Next Chapter Podcast is proud to present the Play On podcast series, A Midsummer Night's Dream. A new modern English verse translation by Jeff Whitty.
That will ask for some tears in the true performing of it.
Hear Shakespeare's comic masterpiece about lovers,
For love looks not with eyes, but with the mind.
royals,
Regard your father as a god.
players,
My chief talent is for a tyrant.
and fairies whose worlds are all turned upside down and right side up by powers beyond their control. Go to playonpodcast.com to learn more.
Don't make me play a woman. I've a beard. Growing?
Hi, my name is Miriam Lauba, and I'm the senior producer of the Play On podcast series. I've had the good fortune to work closely with writer, director, and actor Catherine Eaton, who adapted and directed Jeff Whitty's translation of Shakespeare's classic play, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Catherine's many accomplishments include performing on Broadway and in theaters across the country. Her feature film, The Sounding, which she wrote, directed, and starred in, has garnered numerous awards at over a dozen film festivals and earned her inclusion in Ryan Murphy's prestigious Half Foundation Fellowship. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce the extraordinarily talented Catherine Eaton. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I could say the exact same thing about you, so thank you.
Oh, you're very kind. Catherine, I'm going to start off with kind of a question. It's kind of an odd question, but what is the first piece of art that you remember influencing you? This could be a play, music, film, TV. First piece of art as a young person.
That's a great question. Oh, Lord. Oh, it's very hard to say. I guess the first one that comes to mind, I'm sure it wasn't the first. Well, actually, I would say probably one of the very first was a children's book called, I think it's called Corduroy the Bear. I think this is still being read by people, but for whatever reason, the drawings in that book were so beautiful to me on a level that went beyond the story. I didn't even care so much about the story whenever it was read to me. And I must have been, I want to say 3 or 4. I just remember being obsessed with the colors that were in. It was a very warm palette and had a lot of kind of reds and browns and golds in it. And the way that the artist rendered the button, because I think he loses his button on his overalls, I think. This is literally the first thing I can think of now.
I love it. But it was actually, it was a visual connection in some ways to the art and the way that the art, the palette, the color palette made you feel, yes?
Yeah, which is really funny, both in this conversation, which of course is about a podcast, which has no apparent visual, but although it works a lot with visual imagery in our minds and our imaginations, but also because in my career, it actually took me a very long time to kind of return to being the person that was making decisions about the visual, because I came up first as an actor and predominantly stage, and then eventually started working in TV and film, but was not directing, wasn't writing, and then eventually came around to writing, where I started to imagine what the pictures on stage or on film might be. And then directing happened, where I remembered how deeply in love with the visual world I am and have always been. I mean, I've been obsessed with art and photography all through that time. I just never made it a part of my own work. So it's funny then to come full circle and to be working on Midsummer.
Yes, and creating worlds. Well, this is something that I think you're extraordinarily good at, creating worlds. But before we get to that, can I ask you about what the first Shakespeare you ever saw was, and what drew you to Shakespeare? Because you've worked on Shakespeare's been part of your art journey for sure.
Yeah, it's a huge part of it. I was in a Shakespeare play before I ever saw one. So we did, so my introduction to Shakespeare was actually performing. And I think that was a real gift for me because I have a really kind of kinesthetic relationship to material. So being able to actually physically embody it, I think made the language mean so much more to me. We were reading them in school early, maybe sixth grade, I think was the first time we were introduced to some piece of Shakespeare in school. Just as a part of really standard curriculum, but with some exceptional teachers in a very normal public school. And then in seventh grade, we put on the seventh grade class. I believe it was seventh or eighth grade, put on Taming of the Shrew, and I was cast as Bianca.
Oh,
And I fell in love with it. And one of my very best friends, Sarah, was cast as Kate, as the shrew. And it was just, and I really was Bianca at that time in my life. I really was a sort of, I mean, I'd like to say her good qualities, but I
yes.
was kind of an innocent and very, sort of, so I loved, I just loved it. And I fell in love with that. When you said the language, it did something to you, to how you felt inside. And it did
Physically,
things to other
yes.
people as well. And that was that's when I really began this sort of long relationship with Shakespeare that then, became much more complex. But it really started from just saying his words and feeling that they did things, that the language itself did things. So
Catherine, I think I always say that as well, that you can taste it, right? Like you can taste it and
that's
feel
wonderful.
it. Yeah, that's
That's
really
a
poignant.
wonderful way to say it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I love that.
it's and you felt that in seventh grade. Did you then? What are some of the other plays that you have worked on, either as an actor or as a director?
So I've worked on most of the canon at this point, largely. Yeah, I would say most of almost every play. And if we include my feature film, which
Yes.
for people who are listening that may not know this, the film is about a woman who is silent most of her life, and then she takes on an acquired language woven out of Shakespeare's words. She's a contemporary woman. She's raised on an island off the coast of Maine, and she has a reason for this, and it's a gift to someone she loves. But that language then becomes her only way of communicating. And in the sounding in that movie, we actually made sure to use every single one of the plays was
Wow.
touched on in usually multiple times, and quite a lot of the sonnets as well. It was just kind of a personal, for everybody who's a real Shakespeare fan. And newer Shakespeare fans, it would be a little bit different, but for people who've had a lot of exposure to all of his work, it's a fun, people will watch the film and they go, oh, that's from that. Oh, that's from that. Oh, that's from that.
Yes.
And sort of check off
Yes.
we like to say you can play Shakespeare bingo when you're listening to it.
Yes. Yes. Oh,
Um,
that would actually be very fun. That's a yeah.
but as an actor, I've done, I was very lucky because when I learned that you could just study acting and that there were places to go do that, which was not something that was a part of my family background. And I went and got my Master of Fine Arts. I then ended up going into the Guthrie Company and did a lot of work there. I did a lot of work while I was getting my MFA. So I've had the blessing of playing a lot of different roles, Mistress Page, and just all, we
Yes.
can go down the list. But
Catherine, we didn't speak about this, but I started at the Guthrie as well. We've never actually talked about that.
what? That's so
Yes.
great! Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that's
Yeah.
amazing!
Yeah.
Oh,
Wonderful.
that's
So,
great. It was a
did you
beautiful
get your
place to start.
yeah, where did you get your MFA at where did you get your MFA?
University of Minnesota.
Yes, me too. We've
Yeah.
never talked about that.
What? That's
Yes.
incredible.
Okay, we'll have to
That's
get
amazing.
back to
Yeah,
that.
okay.
But that being said, I want to now, I do want to get to the amazing work that you've done. Oh, wait, before that, what is your favorite? Do you have a favorite Shakespeare?
Oh, that's very hard. Midsummer is definitely one of them, for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah.
Um, and I also am a huge fan of Lear, the Scottish play. I mean, ugh, it's very, I'd see, as soon as I say one, I think of the
Yes.
next one and the next one and
Yes.
the next one.
Yeah.
Um,
I
yeah, it's
always
hard.
think,
It's
do
hard
you
to
have a
say.
favorite comedy tragedy history? Like
Oh, maybe that's the best way to
if
think
you
about
got
it.
three, right?
Yeah, I think probably Henry V would be my history. It's a little bit cliche, but still,
No.
I stand by my choice.
I mean,
Um,
yes.
Comedy would be Midsummer, and tragedy
Yeah.
would be, at the moment, Lear.
Okay.
There was a time when I was obsessed, like many people, with Hamlet. Uh, Much Ado About Nothing is also extraordinary for the comedies, sort of semi-comedy. There's quite a lot of tragedy in that as well.
Yeah.
But what about you? Do you have a favorite?
Twelfth Night. I think Twelfth
Oh,
Night is my favorite.
really?
Yeah, I think Twelfth Night is a sort of a perfect blend of comedy and
Mm-hmm.
tragedy, and it has
Yep.
sort of all the elements in it. And the histories I frankly don't know as well, but was working on the Henry Sixes, all-female Henry Sixes, and
Oh,
I have to
fabulous.
say that the Henry Sixes are pretty awesome. They're kind of a great trilogy. Okay, but back to you, Catherine. Next question. So, how did you become involved with the Play On podcast series?
That's a great question. My very dear friend, Michael Goodfriend, is the creative director, and I think the head of scripted
Scripted, scripted fiction at Next Chapter
at Next
Podcasts.
Chapter Podcasts, which is the umbrella for Play On Podcasts. And Michael and I met as actors. We were performing in a show called Michael Archangel, which was a kind of modern adaptation, actually, of one of Chekhov's plays, and we just became very close then, and then moved on. And I remember at the time that Michael then was actually producing radio shows during the run of that show, and which I thought was a fabulous. I thought, what a clever kind of combination of work, right? To have this thing that's very portable, where you're still creating and you're contributing to the world, but you're also able to go off and do theater wherever you want to go do theater. What bliss.
Yeah.
And then flash forward, and I got the opportunity to write and direct the pilot episode for a podcast series, scripted series that's coming out in October, I think, called The Light Ahead, which is an anthology utopian series about the next economy movement, which sounds dry but isn't. Each one of the episodes is its own fictional world, very anthology. It's in the way that Black Mirror is sort of a tech dystopian anthology as
Yes.
a TV
Yeah.
show. This is a sort of utopian economic anthology series, but very fictionalized, very exciting, interesting. Each one is a different genre. I
Wow.
made up what I like to call utopian thriller.
I like that.
It
Utopian
was
thriller.
tricky. It's
Yeah.
hard to do because keeping suspense going while things are kind of wonderful is challenging. But I did that, and it was a really extraordinary experience. And during that time, Michael and I think he saw online that I had been doing it, and he said, "Do you know that I'm doing scripted fiction at Next Chapter?" And I hadn't known it. And then he told me about this project, and I immediately became interested. And then he brought me in first to do the adaptations, taking
Yes.
each of the translations of the plays and adapting them into podcast episodic form. And then ultimately, both of you invited me to direct Midsummer, which I was thrilled about.
So, okay, let's talk about a little bit about how you adapt these translations, because you've adapted for us Macbeth by Migdalia Cruz, Pericles by Ellen McLaughlin, and of course your own, and Coriolanus, which is coming up next by Sean San Jose. What is your process like when you take these works that a modern writer has translated? What is your process of turning that into a podcast script? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So what happens is the first thing that I do usually is I have to, well, it's twofold. So the very first thing I do is I begin to look at where are breaks in what was a play and is now going to be episodic. How am I going to break that up into 6 or 7 or 8 different episodes? Where are natural breaks? Of course, thinking about things like what's going to help an audience be excited about tuning in to the next episode. So you can do that through suspense, which is what we see all the time on television, but there are other ways to do it too, around stakes, around romance, around joy, right? Humor can be a way that makes people go, oh, I want more of that. Give me more of that. So I look for those break points. That's usually the first place, is kind of just in taking the shape. And obviously I do a really deep dive on the play itself. I'm familiar with Shakespeare's versions. The play on versions are new for me. So I look at what the playwright, the translator, has done to make it accessible to a contemporary audience, and also what they seem to be really interested in personally, where they might have spent a little more time, used a little
Yeah.
more of their own language. And then I take that, and it's been different for each one of the adaptations, but the first thing that has to happen after that is I have to figure out this setting where it's taking place, the general location and the time period. And that's often done in conjunction with the playwright translator, with yourself and Michael, with the director, depending on what stage of the process the adaptations are happening in. And then I do a huge research dive into that time period, into that location. What are the sounds? What's the oral world, right? So what kind of animals are there? What do people do? What are their pastimes? What would that world have sounded like at that period in time? So everything from the natural elements, right? Is it, if we're in a city, what kind of city is it? What is the paving made of? What are doors made of? What's the transportation? All of that. And I create kind of a big, huge document that just has tons of sound choices, tons of location, like specific location choices within a given place. So we were working with medieval Scotland for the Scottish play for Macbeth, and I realize I can say it here because I'm in a house and not a theater. and and so thinking about what were the kinds of places in Scotland that people would be meeting, that what did it mean to go from one, from a particular location to another that's actually named in the play, what's the distance, those kinds of things. And I build out this sort of huge document, and then I go back into the play and I just look at each scene and think about what's really being transacted in that scene, and what is the best environment to give us a really colorful, imaginative oral experience, right? Like it's always been my goal, and this has come through you and Michael as well, that these be really immersive in terms of the sound experience. So what is the place that's going to have a really rich soundscape, and that soundscape can be used to augment and support whatever action is happening in the play? And then how can I help ground the actors in their emotional beats, those whatever the characters are going through? How can I give them what they might have done physically if they were on stage or if they were in a scene? How can I give them the sort of same physical embodiment? And then I just go through scene by scene, and I think about it really as a kind of the 6 episodes or the 8 episodes or whatever it is, as being sort of one crafted whole. So I try to make sure that there's variety. I'm also really interested in things like touching on sacred spaces versus ceremony spaces versus gathering spaces versus home spaces, because I think they bring up different things for us. And then anytime there's comedy, making sure that the soundscape can support whatever comedy the actors are bringing and also stay out of the way of them. So those two things I think are really important, which is really similar to directing, actually weirdly, on camera with comedy as well. You want to make sure that you're setting up a fantastic playground, and then you stay out of the way of the comic exchanges in a lot of ways. So
Well, I didn't realize that you built out a huge master list. I'd love to see the difference in the master list, because what I think has been extraordinary is that they are such different worlds. Each of our podcasts live in such distinct different worlds, and the soundscapes, which of course then our designers take and add to, but they do add to the telling. And just for our listeners, I will say that it's always the first moment when we get Catherine's adaptations of these translations that feels like the starting point of, and the sort of like, oh, yes, here it is, here it is. Every single time we've gotten one of your adaptations in our emails, it's like, oh,
thank you for saying that.
It's so true, Catherine. They've all been very good and very distinct, and following the lead of the actual translator, which is not simple to do.
It's not, but I think oddly, it's kind of a skill set that's weirdly one of the things that's been a real pleasure for me in doing the adaptations, because it draws on my imagination and my writing, but it also draws on the skills that I think we learn as actors as well when we're coming up as actors, because as actors we have to be able to take other people's visions and fully
Yes.
embody them and fully embrace it and hopefully amplify that, right?
Yes.
Not, you can't be fighting against it, you can't be imposing something different on it, you need to amplify what's there. It doesn't mean that it's any less our work. It's
Yep.
perhaps oddly, I would offer that sometimes you have to have an even greater skill set in that case, because you have to be able to be a Jeff Whitty and you have to be able to be a Migdalia Cruz, right? As an actor and as an
Yes.
adapter, I think both. So
Yeah, letting the work come through you.
exactly.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, so then you, well, let's talk about how you ended up directing Midsummer. This was one that was on your list that you wanted to direct, yes?
Yeah,
Can you
it
talk
was
about
the
why?
one.
Why?
Sure, yeah. I mean, Midsummer is a play that I've had a lot of personal experience with in terms of performance. I've performed in it multiple times.
Which
Um,
roles? Which roles have you played?
Always Titania and Hippolyta,
Okay.
or Titania or Hippolyta.
Okay.
Always.
Yeah.
Mostly Titania and Hippolyta because they are frequently doubled. And oddly, because I would have loved a crack at Helena, right? I think Helena is really in
Yeah.
many ways sort of, Hermia has all the stakes for the play, but Helena in many ways is this sort of emotional center of the play. She's
Yes.
who we chase and fight for. We root for Hermia, but there's an expectation that it's going to work out for Hermia. Hermia has so much personal strength in her
Yes.
language
Yes.
that
True.
there's an expectation that it's going to work out for her. But Helena, we're not sure. We don't know what's going to happen. And so I always think so I would have loved to crack at Helena. So who knows, maybe one day we'll do a very
Yes.
different production where I have that opportunity. But so Titania and the Fairy Kingdom has always been my road into this play. And it was my top choice. It was the one that I really, really wanted to do as a series for Play On, because, and this was prior to my having read Jeff's translation, which I'll talk about in a second because it's really extraordinary. But I hadn't even had the blessing of reading that yet before I knew that I really wanted to do this, because the play already depends so much on us using our own imagination, meeting the play, right? There are, because a lot of it takes place in magical woods, and the fairies have real power, not just sort of, I can make a mushroom grow kind of power, but they have incredible power. They are involved in the fates of humans. They are caught up in the natural world and impacting the natural world. And so that forest is a place of incredible imagination for anyone and of course, the more sensational productions, the bigger the production, the bigger the budget, the more that can be realized visually, but still you're constantly having to meet it, because you are imagining that these are fairies, that these are magical beings. You're imagining that this magic is taking place, that people are flying and being transformed and so forth and so on. And so knowing how much imagination was already at play from the audience with this story, and then thinking about what we could do with that when we didn't have the physical restriction of just general physics, right? Because now we're
Right.
working in a magical world.
Yes.
What we can do with the sound as a result of that just felt to me like such a huge palette and such an exciting palette, and one that I just was really, really hungry to play with, to have the opportunity to say, how do we create this magic in an audio way that's going to then cause the listener to have really specific a really specific relationship to the visuals of what's happening in their own mind, and also a physical relationship to that magic.
Here comes Oberon.
And here, my mistress.
We meet by moonlight, proud Titania.
we used a lot of things with it in working with Arjun Sheth and Patrick Burgess, who were the two sound designers for the series. We worked a lot on things like perspective and feeling like the fairies would appear and Puck might be whispering in your ear, and the lovers are approaching and they disappear again, and what their power sounded like. So all that was super exciting to me, not to mention that it's a love story. It's a story that at the moment I think is actually, it has incredibly high stakes around gender inequity, right? Because Hermia is being told she has to marry someone, and if she doesn't, she either gets to become a nun or she has to die. Those are her options.
Yes.
And that's at the base of it. And then beyond that, there's also this element that is I think something that is, for me anyway, I feel like it's something that's really important in terms of where we are right now. It felt to me like something that needed to be spoken to, which is around the illusion that we're in control, and our desire to be in control, right? And society's desire to be in control, and then having real world stakes come up that show us that we aren't in control. And so how does that change how we live and how we behave? In Midsummer, of course, that lack of control, or that embracing of chaos or releasing of control, is through the magic and through the fairies that they do. But in our own world, we've just had a huge experience with it through the pandemic, right? That's something that we have not had control over. So how does that change how we relate to each other? How does it change what our priorities are on a day-to-day level? So for me, I felt like I really wanted to do this play right now as well.
That's beautiful. What a great description of how the world, the loss of control in the world, and that magic is what Shakespeare decided was going to sort of, not even soothe is not the right word, but help people through in some way.
And I think he's really playing with the idea of revealing that it's an illusion anyway, right?
Yes.
Because we start the whole play with this very high stakes court scene.
Yes.
And then they go through this journey in the woods and they come out on the other side, and everything that was all of the intention of that court scene has been dismantled.
Yes.
And we don't have any of it anymore. So he kind of just strips away all of our sort of pretensions and illusions. And I'm not saying that those kind of social constructs aren't necessary. There is some necessity to some of them, but they get misunderstood and misused. And I think we depend on them and have an expectation around them that is not, it doesn't allow us to be the fullest version of human beings that we can be.
Oh, hell! I see you all are bent to mock my passions for your merriment. If you were civil and knew courtesy, you would not do me this much injury. Can you not hate me, as I know you do, but you must join in souls to mock me too?
And so by realizing we aren't actually in control, and also stripping away the idea of power, right, which is an illusion of control, taking that away is incredibly valuable. So
yes. Can you talk a little bit about what you thought about Jeff Whitty's translation when you did read it? So you know that you're interested in this play. You know that you have these desires to illuminate this in a soundscape. When you read Jeff's translation, what were your thoughts?
I was thrilled. I mean, I didn't know, because at that point I had read all of my exposure with Play On has come through this series. I did not know about Play On prior to this, which is surprising actually, because I know quite a few people who've been involved in it. But what a wonderful introduction for me. So I had seen two other translations, right, of Macbeth and of Pericles. And then I read Jeff's, and they were both really interesting to read. Really, it's a really fascinating process, because especially if you're familiar with the playwright's body of work at all, you do see
their voice.
their voice. You really do. And it comes through, even though they are truly honoring Shakespeare's story and intentions, I believe, so far in what I've seen.
Yes.
When I read Jeff's, I was beyond thrilled because I really think I loved the play to begin with. And I thought, someone's going to have fun with this, right? There's a lot of fun to be had. But what Jeff did was actually really take the play and pull everything into relief. So where there was darkness, he made it that much darker. Where there were stakes, he made those stakes feel immediate and present and not dated and antiquated, right? It's very, when I sort of say, Hermia's stakes are she either has to marry this guy or she dies or goes to a nunnery. It sounds to a Western audience or to an American audience, it sounds like, oh, that's old fashioned times. But what Jeff did in the translation was bring it forward in a way that to our ears, those stakes are very, very real.
Yeah.
And maybe those actual circumstances are happening less, hopefully, in our world. The underlying power structure is still very present. And he brought that out into relief in a really extraordinary way, while not losing any of the humor. And in fact, bringing humor into moments that hadn't had it prior, which was great, because what better than to sort of be able to laugh at the darkness, right?
Yes.
And then when we got into the places that are impish and puckish, that is, Jeff just, his voice sings in those places. His use of language is incredibly playful. It's incredibly intelligent. He also turned a lot of phrases so they still held Shakespeare and Shakespeare's meaning, but you'll be listening to hopefully people at home will be listening to the episodes and you'll hear a very contemporary turn of phrase that doesn't feel out of place at all. It feels very genuine to the character. And 9 out of 10 times that's Jeff, and 1 out of 10 times that's Shakespeare. And it's really wonderful.
I am that merry wanderer of the night. I jest to Oberon and make him smile. I'll feed a horse some beans, then in a while they'll start to like they're a newborn foal. Or I might linger in a gossip's bowl, and so disguised as a roasted crab, that when she drinks, against her lips I stab, and on her wrinkled neck down pours the ale. The wisest aunt, who tells the saddest tale, from thinking I'm a stool, will rest her hind on me. I slip under her bum, down topples she, crying, "Tailor!" falling then into a cough. All in the tavern hold their hips and scoff, their mirth so multiplied, they sneeze and swear a merrier hour was never wasted there.
A lot of me felt that if Shakespeare was alive today, his voice would not be dissimilar to Jeff Whitty's. I know that's a strange thing to say,
no,
but
I think it's a beautiful testament to Jeff's work. We have to tell him, yes, but that's true. Like a kind of naughty, playful lover of words, right?
Yeah, and also someone who is deeply humane, has a deep, real understanding of the messiness and complexity of human beings, and finds beauty in that, but also is able to ask the difficult questions.
Yes.
And I think Jeff does that, and I think Shakespeare does as well. So it was a perfect pairing.
Oh, I love that. I look forward to sharing that with him. Okay, so can we talk a little bit about the extraordinary group of actors that were assembled, and what maybe some of your favorite moments were?
The actors that we had for this were really, really extraordinary. Incredible talents. And for people at home, just to understand how quickly they had to be able to lift this up off the page and bring life to it, and not just life, but remember that they're recording these things in studios and in closets and things, right? They're in small spaces. They don't have one of their key tools, because all of these actors are also film, TV, or theater actors, or all three. So they are used to using their bodies, and they don't have that. You're not going to see it. They were still using it while they were recording, but people at home aren't going to be able to see it. So they were able to take all of that and put it through their voice and give you this picture of what was happening in such a beautiful way. And every single person in the cast was just an extraordinary human being as well. I mean, genuinely extraordinary. And I know that just sounds like a sort of very general rave, but it's not always the case. I love actors, and I love all different kinds of actors. Truly, I think that removing myself from that category for the moment, I think that there's something really extraordinary about people who take their physical body and put it on the line in order to create a greater store of empathy in the world. I think that's just a really special person. And I think there's a real risk and vulnerability that happens when you do that. And of course, the stereotype around ego and so forth, the reality is that comes out of a protection of that vulnerability that has to be protected because it has to be available. All these actors had that vulnerability, and not an ounce of apparent fear, I'll say, or hesitancy or reluctance. Every single person just dove in. And it didn't mean that they weren't asking questions, because they're all highly intelligent. So I really felt like they were, and I almost always feel this, but I felt this in a really extraordinary way on this project, that they were true collaborators. Yes. So we had everyone from the Lovers, which was Gopal Devan as Lysander, and Jamie Ann Romero as Hermia, and I'm going to forget people, Christopher Livingston as Demetrius, and Alex Henriksen as Helena. They created their own, and some of them were doubling in other parts, but they created their own little tag team where they really were playing off each other, even though for the most part when they were recording they could sometimes see each other, but barely. And, it was just really incredible. And then one of the things that was so important to me in the Fairy Kingdom, which was Michelle Beck, who played Titania, and Amari Cheatham, who played Oberon, and Daisuke Tsuji, who played Puck. And then we had our whole little grouping of other fairies, was that they all had that element of the darkness of the forest in them, as well as the playfulness, right? That the chaos and the energy of chaos they had to have some piece of that. And what was really exciting to me was to bring actors into a room that I believed had that, to not be 100% sure if they did, to bring them into a room, to see that they did have it, and then to have them use it so generously and so in support. Because you think if you bring sort of someone who has that kind of spontaneity and a little element of danger in their performance in the best possible way, that could create a problematic rehearsal space or a problematic recording space. And they were all insanely prepared, insanely committed, incredibly wildly talented and playful and generous, and just beautiful human beings to be around. And then, of course, there's the entire rest of the cast, right? So Cedric Lamar, who played Flute, Armando McLean, who played Aegeus and Snug, David Furr, who was Theseus, Manila Luzon, who played Hippolyta in a stellar turn. I think I've got everybody now, but they were just amazing.
Jen Harris, who played
Bottom. Jen!
Yeah.
And I can't forget Jen, because Bottom is normally traditionally cast as a man or a male identifying human, and Jen is a female identifying person, and a comic genius. Yes. A true comic genius, just really, really extraordinary, and had to do the incredible transformation when Bottom wears an ass's head, becomes half donkey. Actually did that transformation vocally and just killed it. So yeah, I mean, it was a delight.
It's funny, we were talking, because it was something that we also worked on in post, because she did it vocally. We wanted to keep some of her vocal present in the donkey. And I will tell you, it was one of Jeff's favorite sort of sound things, the combination of
that's so great.
Jen's voice with the donkey. Yeah.
Right, because the choice would have been to just use the donkey or just use Jen. And what happened is we had this beautiful gift, because it was done through audio, where we could blend the two. So we got to keep Jen's response in everything while also having the true animal sounds. Donkey, it was fabulous. Sounds. It was a joy. Yeah.
As truest horse that yet would never tire.
If I were fair, Thisbe, I were only yours.
Oh, Bottom, you are transformed! What do I see on you?
What do you see? You see an ass head of your own, do you?
Monsters, oh, strange!
And I want to mention Gina Yee as well. I think that's everybody.
Oh, Gina, yeah.
Yee,
Gina was amazing. She played Quince and she also played Moth. And there is not a person who has listened to this series that has not fallen in love with Moth. Everyone, I don't know what it is about Moth, but everyone falls in love with her. So,
so wonderful. Okay, I want to ask you. Okay, did you have a favorite? Well, let's talk a little bit about the sound designers before I ask you about favorite moments. Can you talk about working with both Patrick and Arjun and George Whitty, the composer? Can you talk about working with the sound designers on this?
yeah, absolutely. And they're an amazing, amazing team of human beings. So I'll talk about George first. George is an incredible musician, composer. He's a musician in his own right as well as being a composer, and has a incredibly wide palette in terms of his ability to create music, right? He can do everything from country to jazz to opera to, I mean, he's a true chameleon in terms of what he's able to create. And I had a really, really specific vision for, or we'll say, whatever the correlation to vision is for audio,
Right.
for what I was hearing and how I wanted, what I felt that music could do, score specifically could do in this world. Around, again, going back to that idea of our loss of control or our illusion of control, right? And when do we feel not in control in the best way, in the most celebratory way? It's not a surprise that when oppressive regimes are brought into power, they or seize power, one of the first things they do is control the music, because music it circumvents our sort of intellect and it goes right into the body. We've all heard songs where we just want to move, right? Wherever we are, whatever we're doing, we want to move. And it doesn't matter. Maybe we curtail it because we're in public and we feel a little bit shy, but we feel the impulse. The impulse is there. And if you can let go of that impulse, if you're surrounded by sound, if you immerse yourself in sound and you're entirely alone, you do move. You're not going to not move because there's a joy in it. And I really wanted the music to do that. I wanted it to unleash the desire in the audience members, in the characters, in this world, to let go with abandon. And so having moments where places in the episodes that really unleashed musically and got into our bodies, got around our minds, even around our emotions, and just tapped directly into the body was really important to me. But then we also still did need a composer who had the sensitivity and the delicacy to understand how to score the emotion of the play, because it's a very emotional play, right? There's a lot of love stories happening in it, and high stakes around dreams, right? We don't talk enough, I think, about the players, which is the actors that are in a play within the play, which is Bottom and Peter Quince and crew. Their dreams are on the line, right? They're very funny and we get to laugh at them and enjoy them, but they have a dream of doing something great and leaving their mark on the court and sharing their storytelling ability, and it's really important to them. So having somebody who could cross those lines and score the emotional beats of that while also having this danger element was really important. And George just killed it. He is an extraordinary composer. He was so committed and creative. I mean, if something wasn't working, and I'm not a musician, so I would articulate it to him in language that was, I would either, offer him something that I thought was more in the vein of, sometimes from his own music, right, from his own works, sometimes from other people's works. Or we would go into a session together live on Zoom and he would pull pieces out of the composition and say, what about this element? Do we like this element? Is this what you mean? And we found our way that way. And it was just an incredible, incredible process. He created so much music for this. I think when we listen to it, because it's woven in so beautifully, because he did such an incredible job of weaving it in so beautifully, it might go by without the realization of just how many pieces of music this man created. He's just incredible. I mean, endless. Like, he's a music machine.
Yeah.
Not that it doesn't come without a toll, right? He has to generate all of that,
Yes.
but he's a music machine. And he also happens to be Jeff's brother, which is aside from the point, because he was but without a doubt just the perfect person for this project. So it was just a wonderful parallel.
We are trying desperately, or trying to figure out a way to do an episode of just his music, right? So that you can hear sort of all of it live, you know. So we'll hopefully, fingers crossed, we can find a way to
That'd be
bring that
amazing
to our audience as well. And that bed benediction at the very end of the podcast is truly such a wonderful, wonderful moment.
It's incredible.
Wrote. Yeah.
He really realized that when we because we had to come up with that music very early when we still had the actors on board in order for them to be able to record their singing, as you know. And so articulating what I needed the end of the series to be when we hadn't created the beginning of the series yet together, was, you know, I had concerns. Would I be able to communicate it? Would George understand what I was trying to communicate? And it was, as soon as I heard it, I just thought, that's incredible. It's incredible that someone can take something out of your imagination and realize it in a way that's everything you'd hoped for and better than you had hoped for. So it was really extraordinary. And I didn't even get to talk about Arjun and Patrick, the work with sound design, if I should jump into that briefly, but both of them are incredible. They are the sound designers, so everything everybody hears at home outside of score, outside of music, and the actors themselves has been created. The entire world has been created by these two human beings, these two designers. Arjun did the first 3 episodes and Patrick did the last 3 episodes of the series, and they are collaborators on projects themselves, so they had a really incredible ability to communicate with each other. And so what we were talking about earlier around the idea of how do we create this magic and this risk and this danger and this lack of control and this huge imaginative world through sound. When it's magic, there's an endless amount of possibilities. And it really was through working, in this case with Arjun early on, because Arjun was the first one on board, around how to create what that sound needed to be, that it had to be playful, but also have danger in it, that it had to be able to stir us and shock us, but also be impish and delightful. And he really was able to find that. But not only, obviously, did he have to do that, he had to do every footstep, every bird that chirps, every bit of wind, every, we had to make visible, quote unquote, visible, the things that you would normally see on stage, like the transformation when Jen Harris becomes bottom, and when she's playing bottom and she gets transformed into the ass head, being able to make that visible, right? Because normally on stage you see that happen. You see her become a donkey from the neck up, and you see bottom become a donkey from the neck up. And in this case, we didn't have the visual to give people. So how do you create that? And we all worked as a team to make that happen. But it was really through the sound design that world is made manifest. And then they, of course, also worked on perspective and immersing us. We talked a lot about, I spoke with both of them a lot about when it was really important to me that we were in the middle of the argument, right? Maybe the lovers are arguing and we need to be in the center of it. We should be between Hermia and Lysander. Yeah. And when was it important that we got distance? When was it important that the argument was happening off to our left, right? And Oberon, the sound for Oberon comes up on our right. Yeah, all of which can be done in terms of how they place the sound in the headphones, in the speakers. So.
Yes, extraordinary design. Catherine, we are coming to the end of our time, but I do want to ask you this final question. Do you have any favorite moments, either behind the scenes or when you listen to it? Do you have favorite thoughts or moments about this, on this piece?
Oh, so many come to mind, actually. Behind the scenes, there was one of the last days that we were recording. And we had almost the entire cast, because almost the entire cast is in the final moments of the play, the final few minutes of the play. And it's technically challenging. And we had Sada, our sound engineer, was extraordinary in recording and so forth. And we weren't sure if it was going to work. And the players played and the court reacted, and everyone was just one huge, beautiful company. And that was a great, great joy to me. I loved working with George in composition sessions where they were live, and we were, he was playing different snippets for me and would create in front of me, and we could pull it apart and move it around. That was really exciting. And then in terms of the final result, it's so hard to say because I just have there's so many scenes that I love. I love episode 2 because it's when we first really, really move into the forest. But I'd be remiss not to say that the players scene in episode 1, I can't listen to it without just falling out of my chair. They're so funny. So there's a lot.
Well, Catherine, it was such a pleasure to work with you on this. I mean, your vision from beginning to end, from the adaptation all the way through to the last bit of putting in sound, has been extraordinary. It's an extraordinary series, and I know Jeff is tickled by it, and like you, the people that have listened to it are just over the moon, because you have, in fact, made magic oral, visible. You've made magic come to life in an oral way. So thank you for that. Thank you for taking us on this journey, and thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I'm so glad to have been a part of it.
How now, spirit?
Next Chapter Podcast is proud to present the Play On podcast series, A Midsummer Night's Dream. A new modern English verse translation by Jeff Whitty.
That will ask for some tears in the true performing of it.
Hear Shakespeare's comic masterpiece about lovers,
For love looks not with eyes, but with the mind.
royals,
Regard your father as a god.
players,
My chief talent is for a tyrant.
and fairies whose worlds are all turned upside down and right side up by powers beyond their control. Go to playonpodcast.com to learn more.
Don't make me play a woman. I've a beard. Growing?
Next Chapter Podcasts is proud to present the Play On podcast series, Macbeth, in a new modern English verse translation by Magdalia Cruz.
Art thou but a dagger of the mind?
Hear Shakespeare like you've never heard before. Performed by award-winning actors in a production that breathes new life into a timeless tale.
Men are weak.
Go to playonpodcasts.com to learn more. Put on your headphones, and don't forget to wash your hands.
Leave all the rest to me. Next Chapter Podcasts is proud to present the Play On podcast series, Pericles.
Young Prince of Tyre. These skulls belonged to princes like yourself.
They say give up before you're just like them.
In a new modern English verse translation by Alan McLaughlin.
My life's at stake.
Starting Friday, June 4th. Here's Shakespeare's timeless tale about a man who loses everything only to find what matters most. Subscribe, rate and review Play On Podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Go to playonpodcast.com to learn more.
I still need a pair of pants.
Well, we can get you some. We can make a pair out of my best shirt.
Next Chapter Podcast is proud to present the Play On podcast series, Coriolanus, in a new modern English verse translation by Sean San Jose. Hear Shakespeare's tragedy about the legendary Roman leader who fell prey to the people and politicians he swore to protect. Performed entirely by women and gender non-binary actors. Go to playonpodcast.com to learn more. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer.